Well, thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Gavel Sender. This thing is coming handy because when you got to scratch your head with my bad elbows, I typically can't reach. This is a real story. So, if you've been paying attention the last few days, you saw this story. It's a tragic story, the church shooting in Texas. Obviously, we had two people who died at the hands of this lunatic. Thankfully, the tragic effects were mitigated because we had a hero, a guy by the name of Jack Wilson, who was armed, who eliminated the threat immediately, this shooter, after he engaged and killed, tragically, two people. Folks, in one of the more disgusting media episodes, I'm sorry to keep harping on the media today, but there's just so much material out there because they're just so pathetic. In one of the more disgusting media episodes I've seen in a long time, the media is now in an ongoing effort to discredit defensive gun use. In other words, the use of a firearm to save lives.
Okay, yeah.
USA Today had a dreadful op-ed. The gist of the op-ed, Joe, was, well, even though this guy, Jack Wilson, may have eliminated the threat and saved lives, 6 other people pulled out their firearms too, and we don't know who those people are, so this is what really scares me. I'm not kidding. That was an actual USA Today. I don't even want anything to do with it because it was so dumb. I don't want one person to click on this stupidity. One, because I don't want to give them the clicks. But secondly, you will be dumber after you read it. And it shows you how stupid people in the left-leaning media are. That's a real argument this person tried to make, Joe. That what really scares them is not a maniac trying to shoot up a church who's killed by a patriotic gun owner who stops the threat. That's not the story to this lunatic who wrote this piece, Joe. The story is that 6 other people, which they did, 6 other parishioners in the church, pulled out their firearms, and he doesn't know who they are, and that scares him, that 6 people had guns in church. This gavel is coming very handy. Thank you to the listener who sent this. I forgot. Did we put the name on who? You remember who that was, Paul? Somebody, I forget the name. Who was it? Was it Troy or something? Well, thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Gavel Sender. This thing is coming handy because when you got to scratch your head with my bad elbows, I typically can't reach. This is a real story. Only if you're a moron. So, of course, the media, instead of saying to the American people, well, listen, you know what? Obviously, carrying a firearm, if you're trained and you're safe with it and proficient, can prevent these types of incidents. That's not the story they went out there because they hate guns and they hate your freedom. So Matt did this piece, Matt Palumbo at Bongino.com. We get a lot of Bongino.com content today. It's not because we're on radio for the first time either. It's just because Matt did a lot of good stuff. The stats on self-defensive gun use, liberals don't want you to see. It's a great piece. It's worth your time. The media is now trying to downplay. Again, what is the story they want out there? That is not the story. The story here is clearly defensive gun use works. Thank God for this guy in Texas. This would have been a whole lot worse, even though tragic nonetheless. That's the story. End of story. They can't have that out there. All weekend and all week, if you've been watching media coverage and cable news coverage of this, Joe, the story liberals want out there is, well, this is rare, Joe. Defensive gun use, the use of a firearm to save lives, that doesn't happen. This is rare, that we shouldn't put any stock in this Jack Wilson story. This is all BS. This only happens rarely. We don't see defensive gun use that often. Really? Because there are actual stats on this, and what we do on the show are facts and data, not liberal BS, which is nonstop. So Matt did a debunking piece we just showed you. Be up at Bongino.com in the show notes. Again, you can subscribe at Bongino.com/newsletter. We'll send you these articles every day. Quote from Matt's piece. A 1994 survey, get a load of this one, conducted by Bill Clinton's Center for Disease Control. Yes, that's right. He was a Democrat, for those of you who forgot. Found that Americans use guns to frighten away intruders who are breaking into their homes about, what would you say, Joe? Maybe 100 times a year, because the liberals are saying it never happens. Defensive gun use doesn't happen. 100?
Yeah.
200 maybe?
Yeah, if I took their issue to heart, yes. Yeah.
Right? Maybe 300. We'll upgrade a little bit. 500,000 times a year. This is Bill Clinton, CDC. Found that Americans use guns, yes, to frighten away intruders breaking into their homes 500,000 times a year. Folks, what's the story? I'm going to get to another statistic in a second, but what's the story the liberal media wants out there? That defensive gun use, like happened in Texas with Jack Wilson, who took out this killer, that doesn't happen. It's a rarity. So don't put your stock in firearms to protect yourself. It's a waste. We got to get rid of guns. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that story is false. Clinton's own CDC tells you the number of defensive gun use incidents for burglaries alone was 500,000 a year.
It's like 500,000.
Not if you're a liberal. If you're a liberal, what Joe just said made no sense if you're a liberal, because you don't do numbers. You have adamantium, vibranium-coated skulls where facts just don't penetrate. They bounce off like Captain America's shield. Bing! Now there's another statistic. You say, oh, man, Dan, is that an isolated one? Well, we'll see. Now let's go back to Obama's CDC, which conducted a gun control study in 2013. By the way, there are a lot more data. There's a lot more data in the piece. I'm only giving you the liberal president's CDC stuff to show you how your liberal friends just make stuff up. So Obama's CDC in 2013 finds that, quote, almost all national survey estimates indicate that defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminals, with estimates of annual uses ranging from about 500,000 to more than 3 million. Let me translate that for the liberals. In other words, at the floor level, people using firearms defensively to save themselves, their property, their lives, the lives of their families and friends, is at least as prevalent as the incidences of criminals trying to attack them, at least, at a minimum. Meaning your BS story, by the way, criminals who don't care about gun laws at all, your BS story that we shouldn't rely on guns because the instances of guns protecting us are so rare that we don't need guns and you should get rid of guns is bull. You get the rest. It's made up at a floor level. We are using them as often as criminals who don't care about them will have guns nonetheless to defend ourselves. Totally, completely made up. Now, liberals listening, because they're not very bright, they'll say, well, doesn't that show that there's a lot of offensive criminal usage of guns by criminals, and therefore we should get guns off the street? That's not what it shows, because you are not getting guns off the street because criminals don't care about gun laws.
Heard a Coach Moore a moment there. Gun laws?
Oh, Jim Mora. Playoffs? Playoffs?
Gun laws?
If you had a press conference for criminals, like Jim Mora had the press conference after the game, right? If you had this criminal up there just arrested on the gun law, and they said, Mr. Criminal, how do you feel about gun laws? Do you think they're going to clean it? Gun laws? Playoffs? That is exactly what would happen. We need to get an actor to play a fake criminal at a press conference and superimpose the Mora press conference playoffs with the criminal about gun law playoffs. You're absolutely right. They think you're morons for this. Nobody cares about your gun laws.
You just heard the Dan Bongino Show. You can also get Dan's podcasts on iTunes or SoundCloud and follow Dan on Twitter 24/7 at DBongino.